Hello everyone, welcome to the second video in my lecture series on polity. In the first video we discussed the Aadhaar Act, some of its features as well as some issues related to it. Now in this video we'll discuss the Aadhaar case. Okay, this case already has had some major ramifications. First of all, to discuss the constitutional validity of Aadhaar, Supreme Court first had to decide if right to privacy is a fundamental right or not. In the Puttaswamy case, Supreme Court decided that right to privacy is a fundamental right, and then it moved on to decide on the constitutional validity of Aadhaar. Okay, so in this video we will take up the issues and the judgment delivered by the Supreme Court one by one. Okay. The first question raised was whether Aadhaar Act violates right to privacy, which was established in the Puttaswamy case. Okay. So first we will discuss what was held in the Puttaswamy case before moving on to the judgment. Okay. The court agreed that right to privacy is a fundamental right. Okay. However, it also stated that it is not absolute. That means there are some restrictions on right to privacy. Now, these restrictions can be due to in nature of public good, establishing a welfare state, national security, etc. Okay, the court gave a threefold proportionality test to establish if a law is within the reasonable restrictions imposed on the right to privacy. Okay, so what is this threefold proportionality test? First is the action sanctioned by a law. That means whatever action that the state is taking, is it sanctioned by a law? Is there a law for it? Has the parliament passed a law for the said action? Second is the action necessary. That means the court will inquire into the necessity of the said action. Okay. And finally is the extent of infringement proportional to the goal. That means that the intrusion on the fundamental right due to the said action of the state, is it proportional to the goal, the objective that is to be achieved by the act? Okay, so applying this proportionality test on the Aadhaar Act, the court held that this action is sanctioned by law, as the parliament has already legislated an act called the Aadhaar Act. Now, when discussing the need for such a legislation, the court went to inquire into the socio-economic condition of our country, as well as it saw the objective of our constitution to establish India into a welfare state. Okay. Now, since there are so many people who are living below poverty line, people who do not have access to 3 meals, okay, so they need such a legislation to ensure that the subsidies, the benefits are reaching them. Okay, because already we are facing so many issues related to inefficient delivery of services due to ghost beneficiaries, exclusion errors. So the court examined if the country needs this law, and it held yes, this law is needed, looking at the overall scenario of the poverty in India. And finally, since having held that the objective of this act is to ensure targeted delivery of services, which is also a necessity, the court went on to examine if the act achieves enough good that the intrusion on fundamental right is validated. Okay, so government submitted many data to the court related to the amount of money it has saved due to elimination of ghost beneficiaries, due to transfer of money directly to the account of the beneficiaries through Jam Trinity, which is a major, Aadhaar is a major component of it. Okay, so the court held that yes, the act achieves enough good to validate its intrusion on the fundamental right of privacy. It also held that the act offers sufficient safeguard to ensure there is no surveillance. Okay, to ensure that the state does not change into a surveillance state, into a police state. For example, Section 29 of the Aadhaar Act bars sharing of core biometric information. Okay, so overall, the court held that the Aadhaar Act does pass the threefold proportionality test, and hence it is constitutional and does not violate the fundamental right to privacy. Also, Jam Trinity is J for Jandhan, A for Aadhaar, M for mobile. So it's the linking of your Jandhan account to your Aadhaar number and to your mobile, so that these subsidies and benefits reach you directly. Next question relates to the constitutionality of Section 7 of Aadhaar. Section 7 empowered the government that it may by legislation make it mandatory for Aadhaar authentication to be used in delivery of services subsidies, expenditure of which is incurred on the Consolidated Fund of India. Okay. It was argued that such a condition of going under Aadhaar verification, Aadhaar authentication, okay, puts a conditionality on availing the benefits of some of the constitutional statutory rights. Okay, like right to food is recognized as a fundamental right. Now, if you want to avail the subsidy for your right to food, you have to undergo Aadhaar authentication. Okay, and it was also argued that this may lead to some exclusion error due to non-availability of Aadhaar or due to failure of authentication of Aadhaar. So the Supreme Court, inquiring into the validity of this section, stated that fundamental rights may lead to some conflict among them. Okay, but we must provide enough space for each fundamental right to operate freely. Okay. It also held that one fundamental right cannot be given precedence over the other. Okay, so a person must enjoy his or her right to food along with his or her right to privacy. So there will be some reasonable restrictions imposed on rights such that they operate freely within their own space. Now, in case of Aadhaar, the court held that there are inefficiencies plaguing the public distribution system. There are ghost beneficiaries, there are exclusion errors already. Okay, and the court referred some of its earlier cases where it discussed the public distribution system, and it stated that even then it opined that a form of electronic verification will improve the efficiency of this delivery system. Okay, it also stated some international cases where identification of poor was considered as the first step to tackling poverty. Okay, in light of these events, the court stated that the Aadhaar Act does strike right balance between one's right to privacy and one's right to food, shelter, because it helps weed out the inefficiencies in public delivery system, thus ensuring that the benefits are reaching those who need them. Okay, benefits are reaching the right beneficiaries, and thus it upheld the validity of Section 7 of the Aadhaar Act. Another issue with Section 7 of Aadhaar Act was that it collides with Article 243G of the Constitution, as well as states' power to legislate on List 2 under Schedule 7. Now, the court to validate this section had to apply the doctrine of pith and substance. The doctrine of pith and substance, what it does is it checks the true nature of an act. By true nature, what I mean is that the core provision of the act. Okay, if the core provision of the act intrude upon any matter that is under list 2, then the act will said to be intruding upon the power of other organ of the government. Okay, for example, if the union government legislates on a matter that is directly related to list 2 of the constitution, then the court will hold that this law is unconstitutional. However, when applying this provision in case of Aadhaar, the court found that the core provision of Aadhaar relates to the targeted delivery of services. Okay, and the argument that public distribution system or poverty alleviation is under list 2 of the constitution, and hence Aadhaar Act is intruding upon this power of the state, the court held that the purpose of Aadhaar does not seem to relate to PDS or poverty alleviation program directly. Okay, because it's only related to targeted delivery of these services. And thus the court upheld the validity of Aadhaar Act against this argument that it intrudes upon the power of state to legislate on state list. Okay, and finally, it was argued that Aadhaar system is not 100% accurate, and thus it may lead to exclusion which may be arbitrary and hence violates Article 14 of the Constitution. Now the court first of all examined the accuracy of Aadhaar, which according to UIDAI is 99.768%, which according to court is high by itself. It also stated that the law has not been designed to be arbitrary. The technology, due to its limitation, may lead to some exclusion, but this exclusion is not intended. Further, it also stated that the law allows individuals to use any other form of authentication in case of failure of Aadhaar authentication. Thus, the court held that Section 7 is not arbitrary and it does not violate Article 14, that is, right to equality. The next issue relates to the constitutionality of Section 29. Section 29 dealt with permissions and limitation on sharing of information. It was argued that since it relates to sharing of information, it violates right to privacy. The court, upon analyzing this section, held that there are sufficient safeguards offered in this section, okay, like UIDAI will only share this data by authority of law. Okay, it does not allow sharing of core biometric data. Thus, it was held that the protection offered is sufficient and hence Section 29 is constitutional. Now, when it comes to Section 33, which deals with sharing of the Aadhaar data in special case, it was argued that it is unconstitutional, again on the same ground that it violates right to privacy. But the court held that this provision where the data can be shared is only on a special basis, special circumstances. For example, when the district judge passes an order to share such information, or if an officer not below the rank of joint secretary holds the view that such information is necessary in national security. However, the court did suggest some improvements in Section 33, subclause 2, by stating that the officer who recommends the sharing of this data should be one who is higher than the rank of joint secretary, that is, secretary and above. Further, it's also stated that such a decision should be taken only in association with a judicial officer, okay, to ensure that it is not only in the hand of executive. And finally, in Section 47, which gave sole power to UIDAI to file complaint in case of any violation of this act, the court held that it is constitutional. However, it also recommended that the law allows for individuals to file complaint against those who have violated their Aadhaar data by accessing it or retaining it. Okay, thus it upheld the validity of this section, but it also suggested that the person whose data has been compromised should also be given the power to file the complaint. To Section 57 of Aadhaar Act, as we have already discussed in the Aadhaar video, that this has been one of the most hotly debated section of the Act. Now, in this, the issue that was raised was that it allows state as well as a private individual or corporate body to make use of Aadhaar authentication. Okay, and not just by a law but also through contractual agreement. Okay, so it violates the first proportionality test, that the action should be sanctioned by law. Now, a contractual agreement is not a law, hence the part of contractual agreement fails the proportionality test and is unconstitutional. Further, sharing of this Aadhaar information with private individual corporate body was held by Supreme Court to be of commercially exploitative in nature, and thus the court struck down this provision as well, that such information can be shared with private individual or corporate body. Thus, while upholding validity of Section 57, so far as the provisions related to sharing of the information sharing of this information by passage of appropriate law by state is valid. However, sharing of this information on basis of a contractual agreement or to a private individual or corporate body was held to be unconstitutional. The next issue that was raised is not related to the provisions of the Act but more to the way the Act was passed. Now, if you all remember, Aadhaar Act was passed as a money bill. Okay, a money bill is defined under Article 110 of the Constitution. It says, if a bill only deals with matter related to expenditure being incurred on Consolidated Fund of India, then such a bill is a money bill. And it gives Speaker the power to certify a bill as money bill, and also states that Speaker's decision is final in this regard. Okay. So the court first had to inquire into the matter if it can scrutinize the Speaker's decision under Article 110 subclause 3, okay, which adds the finality to his or her decision regarding money bill. Okay. Now, the government argued that Article 1110 gives the Speaker final decision in this regard and the court has no power to intervene. It also read Article 122, which gives immunity to any irregularity in parliamentary procedure. Okay, that means the government argued that court has no right in determining matters related to parliamentary procedure, and certifying a bill as money bill is a parliamentary procedure. Okay. So now the court went into some previous cases that it has decided. Okay, for example, Kehoto Holohan, Raja Rampal, Mohammad Saeed Siddiqui, and Yogendra Kumar Jaiswal. Okay, so all these cases relate to the finality given to speaker in some case or the other. For example, Kehoto Holohan deals with the fact that speaker decision was final in the anti-defection law. Okay, so if a speaker disqualifies a member, the member cannot go to court. Okay, but the court held that it is subject to judicial review because speaker's decision may be illegal or malified. Similarly, in Raja Rampal case, the court argued that Article 112 only gives immunity from a procedural irregularity and not illegality. Okay. Thus, in cases where the procedure is illegal or malified or not according to the Constitution, the Supreme Court may intervene. Fine. So, reading these judgment, the court overturned its decision in the Mohammad Saeed Siddiqui and Yogendra Kumar Jaiswal case and stated that it is well within the power of Supreme Court or even High Court to inquire into the finality of certifying a bill as a money bill. Okay, thus the court has the power to decide if Aadhaar bill has been rightly certified as a money bill or not. Okay, after establishing that it has the power of judicial review in this regard, the court went on to examine if Aadhaar bill was a money bill or not. Okay, the court held that Section 7, which deals with the expenditure arising out of consolidated fund, as the heart and soul of the Act. Reading Section 7 along with the preamble and the title of the Act, the court held that the major concern of the Act deals with expenditure arising out of the consolidated fund, and other provisions such as Section 57, etc. are only ancillary in nature, which is covered in Article 110 subclause G. Okay, and thus it held that Aadhaar bill has been rightly passed as a money bill. Now we'll look at some of the miscellaneous issues related to the Act. Okay, first of all, Section 139 AA of Income Tax was amended, which allowed PAN linking of Aadhaar. Okay, so the Supreme Court held this as constitutional as it satisfies the proportionality test because there was a need for such a legislation as there were many fake PAN cards around which were made for the purpose of tax evasion. Okay. Next up, the Supreme Court held that the mandatory linking of Aadhaar with bank account does not satisfy the proportionality test because it didn't find a need for it. Like, okay, there was no necessity of this, as well as there was no act for this regard. Similarly, the linking of Aadhaar with mobile number was held to be unconstitutional because it did not satisfy the proportionality test. Now, the court also held that Aadhaar cannot be mandatory for appearing in exams held by CBSE, NEET, UGC, etc. because these exams are not benefits arising out of Section 7. Okay, and since the Act relates to expenditure like subsidies, benefits, expenditure of which is incurred on consolidated fund, thus this mandatory Aadhaar authentication for appearing in exams was not under any benefit under section 7. Okay, and finally the court also held that to enroll a minor under Aadhaar, parental consent is a necessity, and it also stated that when the child reaches the age of 18 they can withdraw from Aadhaar. Okay, so these were the issues related to the Aadhaar Act and Supreme Court's decision on those issues. Okay, now there's a very small ancillary video lecture on the recent amendments proposed in Aadhaar Act in January, which has been passed as an ordinance because Rajya Sabha was adjourned. Okay, we'll discuss that, and that will be all for Aadhaar for now. Thank you.